I am the ghost of Progmas present, and I'm joined by the ghost of Progmas's past and future, Brian.
Good day.
And Ed.
Happy Progmas.
A Merry Progmas to you.
Merry Progmas, everyone.
A Merry Progmas, everyone. So today we are just real quick saying goodbye to Season 1. So I had just two parting thoughts as we leave the Season 1. So this is kind of psychedelic music and the first little sprinklings of prog behind. Kind of things I've synthesized as we've been going through these albums kind of chronologically. So the first one is 1967, and I guess the late 60s in general, because there's just old-time psychedelic music for me. I had not put together that the Beatles were at the height of their popularity and power, whereas Pink Floyd and the Moody Blues and the other kind of like early 60s bands like Cream were just at the beginning of their journey. And I thought it was actually really fun to compare psychedelic music as done by trained professionals with psychedelic music as done by their babies, and their babies will be the people who will go on to make the music we all love.
Yeah, I really like that.
What do you mean by trained professionals? Like contrasting...
So the Beatles obviously had been the Beatles for 7 years, and they had toured the world, and they had played their, 10,000 hours of music and stuff. They were there with George Martin, currently, the best producer in the world, and Abbey Road, the best studio in the world. When they make Sgt. Pepper's and Revolver, they're at the height of their Beatles powers. And then it was funny to contrast that with Moody Blues, who are on their second album for Days of the Future Past, and Pink Floyd, who are on their first, and how, in my mind, 1967 is just this, blur of whatever, but it was funny to hear the contrast of those two takes on psychedelic music. And it's been fun to hear these, what are actually young guys do their first little steps into the world of prog. So we've had the Yes album and Genesis' first classic album.
Yeah, I think the Beatles being like a catalyst for all of this, I think. Like you say, they've done their 10,000 hours, and some of the things that they've done with their songwriting, all the genres that they've gone across at this point. Anyone who's looking at picking up that mantle, they're looking at these guys like they've done everything. They've done all the songwriting stuff. So if we want to do something different, we need to do it with not necessarily singing songs, but with doing something different musically or doing something differently with technology. And I think it's a very, very interesting time for technology.
Yeah.
Moving out of the 60s and into the 70s. It's kind of the point where guitars and amps and keyboards are kind of at a place where they never really get any better.
Yeah, it's the technologies we hear now.
Yeah, and even if you do get the most cutting edge piece of equipment now, it will always have something that's trying to emulate the music of the equipment of this time. And if that's just because all your favorite songs were written at this time, and even if they are technically poor sounding bits of equipment, you've heard them too many times. They are now part of your makeup, and you always hunger for that sound. So I feel like the technology is a very important part of this
part
period,
of the tale,
because like I say, the kind of songwriting achievements and stratosphere has already been reached. Where can we go from here? We must do something different. We must make sounds that people have not heard before. That kind of psychedelic thing was doing that. You just, as soon as I think about sounds that change music, I think of Jimi Hendrix, and he just wasn't around long enough to be the thing that these prog bands ended up becoming. Yeah. Well, if you look at the way he started using equipment, he was always the first guy to use that amp, the first guy to use that fuzz pedal, and it's why he was such a trailblazer. And why he's so famous for being that is he was just
the guitar man, like literally the guitar man. Yeah.
Yeah, I think all the guys that are into tech, when it's shifting, when it's changing, they become the guys that are remembered for doing something that truly is progressive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say, I think, again, that the Beatles trailblazed a lot of that too. So I've really enjoyed hearing the handoff from the psychedelic years to the prog years. So one other thing I'm going to just flag up, because it encapsulates everything I love about prog rock and everything I love about music in general. The song, In the Wake of Poseidon by King Crimson. And the reason I feel like it distills everything I love about this genre into one magnificent song is it highlights my ideal of what a song should be. And that is, it sounds great as just like a guy playing on a guitar. So this could have been Greg Lake's solo with a guitar. But then they added the Peter Sinfield lyrics and Greg Lake's performance and Robert Fripp and the drummer just going to town with the fills. Fantastical imagery, and it just elevates it. It was a beautiful song, and now it's like a divine song. And I think Peter Sinfield literally talks about cosmic jokes and the human condition and some made-up pantheon. Like, I think it's got all the fantasy imagery, but all of the prog whatever, and a heaping dose of mellotron, and drum fills up to your eyeballs. And interestingly enough, it does not end on a guitar solo, which you feel like it's going to. But anyways, all of this to say, this song represents for me everything I've loved about this genre. And I think the same could be true for Starship Trooper that we talked about on the Yes album. I think that's another one of these songs where it would sound great as just a guy playing guitar, and then they added stuff to it to take it to the stratosphere. For all of those reasons, that is why I enjoy prog rock.
Like I say, it's been really cool having this sort of reading list of new albums to listen to.
Of shit
and
to do.
Stuff. Well, I don't know. I'm the sort of person that, I'll buy a record and I'll listen to it on rotation for like a month before I get my next record. And I don't know. I get stuck on stuff for so long. I think it's nice to be just listen to this thing. Have some thoughts on it. It's been really nice for me.
I mean, that was for me. Actually, taking notes is a big deal.
Yeah, it's really different listening experience. Definitely.
I am proud of what we've done, more Ian than myself. But I'll put it this way: I'm going to put this on my professional CV. My CV is 99% serious. But I have one line about how I won a coffee contest, just like a first place. And my second bullet point, it'd be like host or, whatever, Young Person's Guide to Prog Rock.
Yeah.
Because I figure if someone's interviewing me, it gives me just a small glimpse into my personality. There's a little bit more going on behind the scenes. Of
something. Otherwise, you're just dead behind the eyes.
It's been such a joy being a part of this journey. I mean, obviously, I've always loved prog rock, but in a weird way, I'm rediscovering it for a new time. I don't think I've ever consciously listened to music to try to really pick it apart and understand it. And doing it for a genre of music I already know well has been really eye-opening and very interesting. And especially you, Ian, thank you you're obviously our fearless leader for putting all this time in.
Of course.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be along for the journey. It's crazy to think that in one season of Prog Rock, we've dethroned Joe Rogan as the top podcast on Spotify. It's just been such a wild journey.
Yeah,
beautiful. From someone who's not a massive prog rock fan, or I didn't begin that way. I was familiar with lots of the bands, have been very much interested in a few of the bands, but this has been a learning journey for me. I've come out of my usual psychedelic early 60s stuff and been thrust into the stuff I was scared of, and it's been marvelous to just have this kind of reading list to kind of work through, and yeah, it's always good to be exposed to new things, and I've kind of realized that I've actually really loved this genre, and I always will. I think it's been really, really good to share my thoughts as I've kind of learned a little bit more about these bands, and yeah, it's been really great.
Fabulous.
Thank you very much.
So thank you guys, and thank all of my other co-hosts for Season 1. Thank you all so much for listening. And I have been your host, Ian Prize, and this has been a sort of young person's guide to prog rock. We'll see you again very soon. So before we go, I have a question here from my wife, Mag Prize Art, the person who does all of our lovely little episode thumbnails, who designed the Prog Frog itself. So she was listening to the Sgt. Pepper's episode, and she had heard you, Ed, you're on the docket. You mentioned that they had gone up from 4-track to 8-track, and then you just moved on. And I was actually like, no, that's a very interesting point we should clarify for everyone. Why is it so hard to have multiple tracks? What is a track? And why was the advancement from 4 to 8 to 16 to 24, why was that hard to do? What's going on? Talk to us about tracks there, Ed.
So let's assume you've never come across the idea of recording onto tape before. So you're taking electrical energy and you're transferring it into magnetic energy. And you're doing that by imprinting that signal onto a piece of tape that has magnetic particles on it.
Okay.
And as it's moving, you're imprinting the signal in time onto this tape.
Okay.
So initially, your first problem is the quality of that signal being transferred onto tape. So think of it this way. If you're trying to just record a performance of a load of musicians.
Yep. So Ed with an acoustic guitar, easy.
Easy, yeah. If that performance is flawless from start to finish, easy peasy, great, your job's done. But now if I want to take that recording and add another bit to it,
yep.
If I split that piece of tape in half, I've got the second bit of the tape that I can put information on.
Yep.
Obviously, every time you do that, you've used up a portion of the tape and the quality of the signal is reduced. So if we're moving on to 4 tracks, which is yes, there was 8-track available at the time of the Beatles doing Sgt. Pepper, but they were actually using a 4-track recorder. Now that tape is 2 inches thick.
Okay.
So you've got, you've now got 4 sections. You can record 4 times.
Okay.
Into that same start and finish.
This tape technology, I actually didn't know this. So it's in the 4-track time, it's one very, very thick piece of tape. And then the recording head would go to one of 4 sections on the thing. And then the other 3 sections would be played so that you could play along.
You've got a read head and you've got a recording head.
And the recording head is taking acoustic information, so what you're putting into a mic, converting it electrically to magnetic information that's derived from whatever we're recording on a microphone onto the head. Then the read head goes the other direction, where you're getting magnetic information off, pumping it back through, say, a pair of speakers or something.
Yeah. Now,
yeah,
I think if you take a tape and you're recording onto different sections of the same piece of tape, it means that when you play it back later, it will always be in time with the other sections. So imagine you had just multiple tape machines.
You'd have to sync the literal spinning of the tape.
Yeah.
And that could have been a nightmare.
Yeah, and you imagine, the quality of the tape, some of the, I don't know if they can stretch a little bit over time or, there's so much room for problems.
Well, and then they wear out as you read them.
Yeah.
So as you play them, they literally wear out.
Exactly. And where they're thinking, oh, well, if you've got tape, it means you can re-record onto the same piece of tape again and again and again. You could literally take your tape, get a razor blade, cut sections out, stitch bits back to. You can do all that stuff, but the more you do things like that, the more the signal degrades and the more artifacts you'll pick up.
I mean, you're physically messing with tape.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But because we've heard that actually becomes quite a musical thing. People talk about warmth when they're using tape.
Which is the sound degrading.
Well, basically.
Yeah.
New tape, it should be sterile, shouldn't it? But there is an element of warmth to that and all analog equipment because, you've also got things like vacuum tubes powering the amplifiers and things like that. But like I said, when we move on to solid state technology, there's less heat and warmth and all that sort of stuff, but there's more. You can basically fit more circuitry into a smaller space.
And all of this to say, so the technical challenge of going up from 4 to 8 is that you have to create basically a bigger and more complicated machine to handle physically 8 tracks worth of tape.
Yeah.
So the tape is getting bigger, and presumably the machine's getting more complicated to handle that 8-track.
Yeah. Now, if you've only got the one, your recording is basically, you've got to do it right that first time.
Okay.
If you've got multiple microphones recording the source, they've all got to be mixed into one signal going onto the tape once.
Okay.
You've got to get it right. If you've got 4, you can play around. You can do more interesting things. What the Beatles were doing with Sgt. Pepper that was interesting is when they used up the 4, they'd get another 4-track and they'd play that onto 1 track of the next tape machine, and then they've essentially got...
So this is bouncing.
That's bouncing,
You take, say, a 4-track performance, bounce that onto 1 track of another 4-track performance. So say you'd have 16 tracks now on a 4-track machine.
That's right. And then you can start that process again.
But it means that you have to have all 4 good to go before you bounce them onto the next part.
And you've got to make your decision then how you feel about the mix at that point. So you can't be going back to that later on. Once you've bounced those 4 tracks onto 1 track, those original 4 have to be perfect. The first sort of recording I did was onto a cassette tape. I think it changes the way you approach recording. So for someone who's recording, like I just record onto a computer now, if I do something wrong, I just do another bit, and I just keep adding layers of music until I'm happy. But when I first started doing that, I'd get to... I've done 2 tracks. A 3rd track's broken, so I've got to bounce those 2 tracks onto track 4.
Yeah.
So you've got to make decisions about what you're doing at the second stage. And I think it changes your creative approach to recording. And, we're talking about, how you can do so much with a 4-track. Well, if you rewind to the point where people were first recording anything, you've seen his master's voice, the phonograph thing.
The dog and the parlophone.
Imagine reversing that. So you've got the parlophone thing pointing at the musician.
Yeah.
That would impart information onto a wax cylinder.
Yeah.
And they would just have to do it once correctly.
Live.
Yeah, you just got to do it right. And what you were doing was capturing a performance, whereas when the technology enabled it, we were able to write music using the recording equipment. The period we were talking about, 67, there's so many albums in 67 that seem cutting edge, and it's like, well, we've got this big jump in technology here.
Yep.
You've got more tracks available to you while you're recording, so you can
add more. Just add more.
Yeah.
I mean, I think this is the advance sonically of something like Sgt. Pepper's, where I hadn't really even thought of it too much until I was hearing it. Kind of the magic of Sgt. Pepper's is how much extra stuff they added on. So it's not just 4 Beatles in the room, which is what it was for the first half of the Beatles' career, where they just play a song and they harmonize live, where instead you have, backwards guitars and you've got harpsichords and sound effects and all that sort of stuff. I think we don't think about it now, but adding in stuff being sound effects or overdubs or whatever, adding in stuff was a pretty novel concept.
Yeah, and I think before that, it was only, Pet Sounds, that you heard like so much stuff going on a record.
But then, interestingly, with Pet Sounds, Brian Wilson had just composed orchestral arrangements, and they played that live, because that was also 4-track.
Oh, really?
That was one giant live performance, and then another track of the lead singer of the song, and then another track of harmony vocals. But again, you're talking basically 4 tracks.
It's interesting, because it sounds like more somehow. It sounds like layers of stuff.
And I think because it is, you're putting layers within the orchestration, but the Beatles' advancement was that you're adding layers in terms of what you're recording and then mixing into the song, which is why they could have, the audience clapping and stuff, that type of stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Excellent. And I'm going to stop recording now. Hello, gents. Hello, Ian.
Oh, hello? Wait, I thought is this the beginning or the end?
This is going to be the beginning.
Okay, one more time.